Part 1. The Quiet Presence. A woman overlooked. Let me tell you about Anna. She's the kind of person who fades into the background, unnoticed by most, underestimated by all. But Anna is a storm waiting to be unleashed. A quiet force that will leave you breathless when you least expect it. It's a chilly Tuesday evening, and the community college classroom hums with low chatter and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Students shuffle in, tossing backpacks onto desks, their voices filling the room with youthful energy. Most of them are in their early 20s, confident, carefree, and loud. And then there's Anna. She sits at the back corner of the room, her posture slightly hunched as if she's trying to make herself smaller. Her clothes are plain, a worn sweater and faded jeans, and her hair is tied back in a simple bun. She doesn't make eye contact, doesn't join in the conversations swirling around her. To the other students, she's invisible. To Anna, that's fine. She didn't come here to make friends. She came here for something far more important. Anna is a single mother in her late 30s, working double shifts at a diner just to keep food on the table and a roof over her son's head. Life hasn't been kind to her. It's been relentless, demanding sacrifices at every turn. But tonight isn't about survival. It's about hope. Anna enrolled in this math class because her son struggles with algebra, and she refuses to let him fall behind. She wants to understand math better so she can help him succeed. Not just in school but in life. But in this classroom, Anna is an anomaly. To the younger students, she doesn't belong here. They whisper behind her back, exchange smirks when she asks questions, and roll their eyes when she struggles to keep up with the fast-paced lessons. Jake is the loudest among them, the self-proclaimed star of the class. He's tall, charismatic, and always quick with a joke that makes everyone laugh, usually at someone else's expense. And lately, his favorite target has been Anna. "Hey," Jake whispers loudly to his friends as Anna walks into class one evening. Think she knows what algebra is? Or does she need help counting tips from her diner job? The group bursts into laughter, their voices echoing off the walls like nails on a chalkboard. Anna hears them, of course she does, but she doesn't react. She keeps her head down, clutching her notebook tightly as she takes her seat. To Jake and his friends, Anna is nothing more than a punchline. A quiet woman who won't fight back. But what they don't realize is that beneath her silence lies something they can't see. Resilience forged by years of struggle. The professor walks in and begins writing equations on the board. Complex ones that make even the brightest students groan in frustration. Tonight's lesson is particularly challenging, involving advanced problem-solving techniques that require both logic and creativity. Jake smirks as he scans the room, his eyes landing on Anna in the back corner. An idea forms in his mind, a way to humiliate her publicly while cementing his status as the class clown. "Professor," Jake says suddenly, raising his hand with exaggerated enthusiasm, "can we try solving that equation on the board? It looks tough." The professor nods approvingly. "Sure," he says. "Who'd like to give it a shot?" Jake turns toward Anna with a grin that's equal parts smug and cruel. "How about Anna?" he suggests loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room erupts into laughter, some nervous, some outright mocking, as all eyes turn toward Anna. Even the professor looks uneasy but doesn't intervene. He simply glances at Anna and says hesitantly, "Would you like to try?" Anna freezes for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of doubt. She knows what this is. A setup designed to embarrass her, but there's no escape now. If she refuses, they'll laugh harder. If she tries and fails, they'll never let her forget it. So she stands up slowly, every movement deliberate and measured like someone walking into battle. The laughter dies down as she makes her way to the front of the room, not because they respect her but because they're curious. What will she do? Standing at the board feels like standing under a spotlight. Every eye trained on her, every whisper amplified in her mind like thunderclaps. The equation looms large before her, numbers and symbols tangled together like vines on an ancient tree. Anna picks up the chalk with trembling fingers and stares at the problem for what feels like an eternity. She remembers all those nights spent helping her son with his homework, the frustration in his voice when he couldn't understand something simple, the determination in hers when she refused to give up until he did. She remembers working late shifts at the diner while customers snapped their fingers impatiently for refills, learning patience even when faced with disrespect. And most importantly, she remembers why she's here. For him, for herself, for something bigger than their ridicule. Taking a deep breath, Anna begins writing on the board. Not quickly or confidently but carefully and methodically. At first glance it seems like she might fail. The chalk hesitates between strokes, her lines are uneven, but then something remarkable happens. Her logic unfolds step by step like petals opening on a flower. Her calculations flow seamlessly from one line to another. Her movements become steadier as confidence replaces fear. The room grows silent, not out of politeness but out of shock, as they watch Anna solve an equation that none of them could even begin to tackle. Even Jake stops smirking. His grin fades into disbelief as he realizes what's happening. She's doing it. When Anna finally finishes writing and circles the answer confidently, she turns around slowly to face them all. Her expression isn't triumphant or smug. It's calm but resolute, as if saying without words, "You underestimated me." For once, no one laughs. No one whispers. No one mocks. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room has the loudest impact. And tonight that person was Anna. Part 2, The Challenge. An equation meant to humiliate. Let me take you to the moment when everything changed. The moment when a quiet woman, overlooked and underestimated, turned humiliation into triumph. This wasn't just about solving an equation. It was about reclaiming dignity, proving that strength doesn't need to shout, it only needs to show up. The classroom buzzed with low chatter as students shuffled papers and scrolled through their phones. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a cold glow on the whiteboard where the professor had just finished writing a daunting equation. It was one of those problems that made even the most confident students groan. A tangled web of numbers and symbols that seemed impossible to unravel. At the back of the room sat Anna, her head bent over her notebook as she diligently copied down notes. She didn't look up, didn't engage with the conversations swirling around her. She was here for one reason, to learn. But tonight, the classroom wasn't just a place for learning. It was about to become a battlefield. Jake, sitting in the middle row with his usual entourage of friends, leaned back in his chair with a smirk plastered across his face. He was the kind of guy who thrived on attention, who loved being the smartest person in the room. And lately, his favorite pastime was making Anna the butt of his jokes. "Hey," Jake whispered loudly enough for his friends to hear. "Think she even knows what that equation says? Or do they not teach math at her diner?" His friends snickered, their laughter sharp and cutting. Anna heard them, of course she did, but she didn't react. She kept her head down, her pen moving steadily across the page. She had learned long ago that silence was often the best armor. But Jake wasn't done. He raised his hand suddenly, cutting off the professor mid-sentence. "Professor," he said with exaggerated enthusiasm, "that equation looks pretty tough. Maybe we should have someone solve it for us." The professor paused, glancing at Jake with mild suspicion. "All right," he said cautiously. "Who'd like to give it a shot?" Jake didn't miss a beat. He turned in his seat and gestured toward Anna with a grin that was equal parts smug and cruel. "How about Anna?" he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room erupted into laughter, sharp and cruel and echoing off the walls like nails on a chalkboard. Students turned in their seats to look at Anna, their faces lit with amusement and curiosity. Even the professor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but unsure how to handle the situation. Anna froze in her seat, her grip tightening on her pen as her heart pounded in her chest. She knew exactly what this was. A setup meant to humiliate her, to remind her that she didn't belong here. Her cheeks flushed with heat as she felt every pair of eyes in the room boring into her. The professor cleared his throat awkwardly and looked at Anna. "Would you like to try?" he asked hesitantly. For a moment Anna considered saying no. She could shake her head and let them laugh, let them think she wasn't capable, because what did it matter? She hadn't come here to impress anyone. She had come here for herself. But then she thought of her son, his furrowed brow as he struggled over his math homework, his frustrated tears when he couldn't understand something simple. She thought of all those nights at their tiny kitchen table when she had promised him, "We'll figure it out together." She took a deep breath and stood up slowly, every movement deliberate and steady despite the storm raging inside her. The laughter died down as she made her way to the front of the room, not because they respected her but because they were curious. What would she do? Standing at the whiteboard felt like standing under a spotlight. Every eye trained on her. Every whisper amplified in her mind like thunderclaps. The equation loomed large before her. Numbers and symbols twisted together like vines on an ancient tree. Anna picked up the marker with trembling fingers and stared at the problem for what felt like an eternity. She remembered all those nights spent working late shifts at the diner while customers snapped their fingers impatiently for refills. Learning patience even when faced with disrespect. She remembered sitting alone at her kitchen table after putting her son to bed, flipping through old math textbooks she had bought secondhand from a thrift store, teaching herself concepts she hadn't seen in years. And most importantly, she remembered why she was here. For him, for herself, for something bigger than their ridicule. Taking another deep breath, Anna began writing on the board. Not quickly or confidently but carefully and methodically. At first glance it seemed like she might fail. The marker hesitated between strokes, her lines were uneven, but then something remarkable happened. Her logic unfolded step by step like petals opening on a flower. Her calculations flowed seamlessly from one line to another. Her movements became steadier as confidence replaced fear. The room grew silent, not out of politeness but out of shock, as they watched Anna solve an equation that none of them could even begin to tackle. Even Jake stopped smirking. His grin faded into disbelief as he realized what was happening. She's doing it. As Anna continued working through the problem, something shifted in the room. The mocking whispers disappeared entirely, replaced by murmurs of astonishment. Students leaned forward in their seats, their eyes glued to the whiteboard as if watching a magician perform an impossible trick. The professor stepped closer, his brows furrowed in concentration as he watched Anna's process unfold. He nodded slightly with each step she completed, his expression shifting from skepticism to admiration. Jake sank lower in his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone around him. His friends glanced at each other nervously, their earlier amusement replaced by unease. And Anna? She didn't notice any of it. Her focus was entirely on the equation before her, on proving not to them but to herself that she was capable. With one final stroke of the marker, Anna circled the answer confidently and stepped back from the board. She turned around slowly to face them all, her expression calm but resolute, as if saying without words, "You underestimated me." For once no one laughed. No one whispered. No one mocked. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room has the loudest impact. And tonight that person was Anna. Part 3: The Revelation. Talent hidden in plain sight. Let me take you to the moment when everything changed. The moment when Anna's brilliance, hidden beneath layers of quiet humility, burst forth like sunlight breaking through a storm. This wasn't just about solving an equation. It was about shattering assumptions and revealing the extraordinary in the seemingly ordinary. The classroom was still buzzing after Anna's unexpected triumph at the board. The applause had faded, but the energy lingered, crackling in the air like static electricity. Students whispered to one another, their voices tinged with awe and disbelief. Jake sat frozen in his chair, his usual bravado replaced by a stunned silence. He couldn't look at Anna, not after what had just happened. Anna, meanwhile, had returned to her seat at the back of the room. She opened her notebook and began jotting down notes as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, something seismic, and everyone in that room knew it. The professor cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Class," he said, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. "I think we've all learned something important today." He glanced at Anna, his expression one of genuine admiration. "Talent doesn't always announce itself," he continued. "Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's hidden. But when it reveals itself," he smiled faintly, "it's unforgettable." After class ended, students lingered longer than usual, their conversations buzzing with excitement and curiosity. "Did you see how she solved that?" one student whispered to another. "I couldn't even follow half of it." "She's brilliant," someone else said quietly. Jake stayed behind, his usual swagger replaced by an awkward hesitation. He approached Anna cautiously as she packed up her things, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Hey," he said awkwardly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Anna looked up at him, her expression calm but unreadable. She didn't say anything for a moment. long enough for Jake to start fidgeting under her gaze, but finally she nodded and said simply, "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was enough. The next day in class things were different. The students who had once ignored Anna or laughed at her now treated her with newfound respect. They asked her questions about homework problems and listened intently when she spoke up during discussions. Jake stopped making jokes entirely. In fact, he started asking Anna for help with equations he couldn't figure out himself. At first she hesitated. She wasn't sure if his change of heart was genuine or just an act. But over time she realized that he truly wanted to learn from her, and so she helped him. Slowly but surely, Anna became more than just the quiet woman in class. She became a leader. One evening after class ended late, the professor pulled Anna aside as she gathered her things. "Anna," he said gently, "I have to ask, where did you learn math like that?" Anna hesitated for a moment before answering quietly but firmly, "I used to study mathematics at university." The professor's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You did?" Anna nodded. "I loved it," she said simply. "But I had to drop out when my husband passed away unexpectedly. My son needed me more than anything else." Her voice didn't waver as she spoke, not out of pride but out of acceptance for what life had thrown at her. "I never stopped loving math," she continued softly. "I just didn't have time for it anymore." The professor looked at her for a long moment before saying sincerely, "You have a gift." Anna smiled faintly but didn't respond because deep down, she already knew that. Weeks passed quickly after that night, and with each passing day came new opportunities for Anna to shine. She aced every exam effortlessly. Not because she wanted recognition but because solving problems brought her joy again after so many years without it. Her classmates began relying on her more and more. Not just for help with math but for advice about life itself. They saw in her someone who had faced unimaginable challenges, yet emerged stronger than ever before. Even Jake became one of her biggest supporters. He often defended her against anyone who dared question her abilities, though fewer people did now. But for Anna, her greatest reward wasn't applause or admiration. It was something much simpler. One evening at home while helping her son solve his algebra homework at their tiny kitchen table, he looked up at her suddenly and said proudly, "Mom, you're amazing." And in that moment, everything felt worth it. All the struggles, all sacrifices, all doubts. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won on whiteboards. They're won around kitchen tables where love conquers everything else. And that is what makes talent truly extraordinary. Not just being seen but being understood. Part 4. The Shift. Respect Earned. Let me take you to the moment when everything changed, not just for Anna but for everyone in that classroom. This wasn't just about solving an equation or proving a point. This was about shifting perspectives, breaking down assumptions, and earning something far more valuable than applause: respect. The next day the classroom felt different. It wasn't something you could see or touch, but it was there. A subtle shift in the air, like the calm after a storm. For the first time, Anna's presence wasn't ignored. She wasn't invisible anymore. Students who had once glanced past her now looked at her with curiosity, even admiration. The whispers that had once been mocking were now filled with awe. "Did you see how she solved that problem yesterday?" someone murmured. "She's incredible." Anna walked into class quietly, as she always did, her notebook tucked under her arm. But this time, instead of avoiding eye contact, a few students smiled at her as she passed. One even moved their bag off a chair so she could sit closer to the front. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond to this sudden shift in behavior. Then she gave a small nod of acknowledgement and took her seat. She didn't need their approval, she never had, but she couldn't deny that it felt different. And Jake? Jake was quiet for once. He didn't crack any jokes or nudge his friends with smug grins. Instead, he sat at his desk, flipping through his notes with a furrowed brow, as if trying to make sense of what had happened the day before. As class began, the professor handed out a new set of problems, challenging ones designed to push everyone's limits. He paused for a moment before speaking, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Yesterday," he said, "we witnessed something remarkable." His eyes landed on Anna briefly before continuing. It was a reminder that talent and determination often come from unexpected places, and that we should never underestimate anyone. The room was silent as his words sank in. Then he smiled faintly and added, "Now let's see how you all handle these problems today." The students got to work, heads bent over their papers as they scribbled calculations and tried to make sense of the equations in front of them. But every so often, someone would glance toward Anna, watching her work with quiet focus and wondering what else she was capable of. During the break, Jake approached Anna hesitantly, his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. He looked nothing like the confident class clown he'd been just days ago. Instead, he seemed almost nervous. "Hey," he said awkwardly, standing a few feet away from her desk. Can I ask you something?" Anna looked up from her notebook, raising an eyebrow but saying nothing. Jake shifted uncomfortably under her gaze before blurting out, "How did you do it? Solve that problem yesterday? I mean, it was insane." For a moment, Anna considered brushing him off, letting him stew in his own discomfort as payback for all the times he'd mocked her. But then she remembered why she was here. Not for them but for herself and her son. So instead of dismissing him, she closed her notebook and said simply, "I practiced." Jake blinked in surprise. "Practiced?" Anna nodded. "Every night after my son went to bed," she explained matter-of-factly. "I studied old textbooks I found at thrift stores and worked through problems until I understood them." Jake stared at her for a long moment before saying quietly, "That's impressive." He paused again before adding almost sheepishly, "I'm sorry for how I treated you before." Anna studied him carefully, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But all she saw was genuine regret, and maybe even respect. "Apology accepted," she said finally. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and gave her a small smile, one that wasn't smug or sarcastic but genuine. Over the next few weeks, things continued to change. Students who had once ignored Anna now sought her out for help with their homework, or asked her questions during class discussions. Even Jake started sitting closer to her during group projects, not because he had to but because he wanted to learn from her. At first, Anna wasn't sure how to feel about all this newfound attention. She wasn't used to being noticed or valued by others outside of her own small circle at home. But slowly, tentatively, she began to embrace it. She started speaking up more during class discussions. Not because she needed validation but because she realized she had something valuable to contribute. She began helping other students with their questions. Not because they deserved it, but because she wanted to share what she knew. And through it all, she stayed true to herself. Humble yet confident, quiet yet strong, unassuming yet undeniably brilliant. One evening after class ended late, the professor pulled Anna aside as she gathered her things. "Anna," he said gently, "I have to tell you, you've inspired not just your classmates but me as well." Anna blinked in surprise but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "You remind me why I became a teacher in the first place," he admitted with a small smile. "To help people discover their potential, even when others can't see it." Anna felt a lump rise in her throat at his words but managed a quiet, "Thank you." "No," he said firmly. "Thank you." But perhaps the most meaningful change came not from the classroom but from home. One evening while helping her son with his algebra homework at their tiny kitchen table, he looked up at her suddenly and said proudly, "Mom, you're amazing." And in that moment, everything felt worth it. All the struggles, all sacrifices, all doubts. Because sometimes, the greatest respect isn't earned in classrooms or boardrooms. It's earned around kitchen tables where love conquers everything else. And that is what makes respect truly meaningful, not just being seen but being valued, for who you are and what you stand for. Part 5: The Poignant Ending. A Legacy Reclaimed. Let me tell you about the moment Anna's journey came full circle. The moment she didn't just reclaim her dignity, but built a legacy that would resonate far beyond the walls of that classroom. This isn't just the end of her story. It's the beginning of something greater. It's the last day of class, and the room is buzzing with energy. Students are exchanging notes, joking about exams, and planning their summer breaks. But amidst the chatter, there's an air of reflection. A quiet acknowledgement that something has shifted over the past few months. And at the center of it all is Anna. She sits at her usual spot, her notebook open and her pen poised. But this time she's not invisible. Students approach her with questions, seeking her advice on problems they still don't understand. They don't treat her like an outsider anymore. They treat her like a mentor. Even Jake, once the loudest voice of ridicule, now sits beside her during group discussions. He listens intently when she speaks, scribbling notes as if her words are gospel. His transformation isn't just surprising, it's genuine. He doesn't see Anna as the quiet woman anymore. He sees her as someone to look up to. The professor begins his final lecture, summarizing everything they've learned over the semester. He pauses midway through and looks at Anna. Before we end, he says, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has inspired all of us. The room falls silent as every head turns toward Anna. Anna, he continues, your determination and brilliance have reminded us all that talent is often hidden in plain sight, and that respect is earned through action, not assumptions. Anna feels a lump rise in her throat as the class erupts into applause. She doesn't know what to say. She doesn't need to say anything. She simply nods, her eyes shining with gratitude. But Anna's story doesn't end there. After class, Jake approaches her one last time. He's holding a small envelope in his hand, his expression nervous but sincere. I wanted to give you this, he says quietly, handing it to her. Anna opens the envelope and finds a handwritten note inside. It reads, Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like. I'll never forget it. She looks up at Jake, surprised but touched by his gesture. Thank you, she says simply. Jake smiles awkwardly before walking away, leaving Anna alone with the note in her hands. Weeks later, Anna is sitting at home with her son at their tiny kitchen table. The sunlight streams through the window, casting warm golden light across their faces as they work on his math homework together. Her son furrows his brow as he stares at the problem in front of him. I don't get it, he says, frustration creeping into his voice. Anna smiles gently and leans forward. Let's break it down, she says softly, step by step. As they work through the problem together, Anna feels a sense of peace she hasn't felt in years. A quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing she's not just helping him solve equations, she's teaching him how to face challenges Adion. When they finally reach the answer, her son beams with pride. I did it, he exclaims. Anna smiles back at him, her heart swelling with love and pride. You did, she says warmly. And you can do anything if you keep trying. Her son looks at her for a moment before saying something that makes everything worth it. Mom, you're amazing. But Anna's impact doesn't stop there. Inspired by her experience in class, she decides to go back to school full-time. This time not just for herself but for others like her who have been overlooked and underestimated. She starts volunteering at local community centers, tutoring adults who struggle with math and encouraging them to believe in their own potential. Her sessions aren't just about equations, they're about resilience, confidence, and reclaiming dreams that seemed out of reach. Word spreads quickly about Anna's work, and soon she's invited to speak at local events about her journey, from being dismissed as just a waitress to becoming a leader in her community. At one event, she stands on stage in front of hundreds of people, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady as she begins to speak. I used to think my story didn't matter, she says honestly. I thought I was invisible, that my struggles were mine alone. She pauses for a moment before continuing. But I've learned something important. Our stories do matter, because they remind others that no matter how far down life pushes us, we can always rise again. The audience erupts into applause, not because they pity Anna but because they see themselves in her words. Years later, Anna receives an email from Jake, now working as a teacher himself, thanking her once again for inspiring him back in that classroom. I try to teach my students what you taught me, he writes. That greatness isn't always loud, and that respect is something we earn by lifting others up instead of tearing them down. Anna smiles as she reads his words because deep down, she knows this is what legacy truly means. Not just succeeding for yourself but helping others succeed too. And so Anna's story ends not with fanfare or fame but with something far more meaningful. Respect earned, lives changed, and a legacy reclaimed. Not just for herself but for everyone who dares to believe in their own potential. Because sometimes, the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes.